Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Aparna Vatve, Faculty of Tata Institute of Social Sciences. This module is on International Conventions for Biodiversity. It is part of the paper Environment and Society. In this module, I will first talk about the meaning of biodiversity. This will be followed by an introduction to the global policies. Convention on Biological Diversity and Agenda 21 will be described. At the end of it, we will take a look at Nagoya Protocol. The word biodiversity has many meanings to different people, but it is familiar to most. Biodiversity is vital for economic and social development of humans. Biodiversity is required for many of the basic human needs. It is required today and will also be required for the future generations. In the last century, humans made many changes in the natural landscape. They affected ecosystems and biodiversity. It was necessary to do something to protect the biodiversity. Otherwise, we would have lost our basic needs. Scientists and policymakers have been trying hard to understand the biodiversity and then to stop its destruction. Before we go on to discuss biodiversity, let us first understand what is biodiversity. In the simplest terms, biological diversity is variation found in all living things on the earth. It is the variety of life. It is often divided into three levels. First is the species diversity, which refers to all the species that can be seen on earth. Genetic diversity is the second level. Genetic diversity is the genetic variation that is seen within a species. You and I look very different, but we belong to the same species. This is because of the genetic variation. In the same way, there is genetic variation in plants and in animals. Humans have also created genetic variation. We have domesticated many species as crops and livestock, and in that crop we have created varieties. Ecosystem diversity is the third level of biodiversity. Ecosystem diversity includes all types of habitats which are present on the earth. Each habitat has its own biological community. It has its own ecological processes. When we talk about biodiversity conservation, we mean conservation of all these three levels. The conservation of species, genetic variation, and ecosystem diversity is all included in the biodiversity conservation. The biodiversity, the variety that we see around us today, is a result of 3.5 billion years of evolutionary history. It has been created by natural processes, but humans have also added to it. Biodiversity forms the web of life. Humans are a part of this web. Our food, water, shelter, and healthcare comes from biodiversity. In the last century, it was realized that biodiversity is getting lost at a speed never encountered before. Something needed to be done. The global community came together to do this. In November 1988, United Nations Environment Programme convened an ad hoc working group of experts on biological diversity. Their aim was to explore the need for International Convention on Biological Diversity. In May 1989, the ad hoc working group became known as the Ad hoc Working Group of Technical and Legal Experts. They prepared an international legal instrument for the conservation and sustainable use of biological diversity. They took into account the fact that the need to share the costs and benefits between developed and developing country is prerequisite of biodiversity conservation. The experts also had to find ways and means to support innovations by local people. By February 1991, the ad hoc working group became known as Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee. Its work ended in May 1992 with the Nairobi Conference. In this conference, there was adoption of agreed text of the Convention on Biological Diversity. The convention was opened for signature on 5th June 1992 at the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development at Rio in Brazil. This conference has today become famous as the Earth Summit or the Rio Earth Summit. Many significant decisions were made during this Earth Summit. They affected biodiversity as well as humans. In June 1993, the convention received signatures from 168 countries. It was entered into force from 29 December 1993. The first session of the signatories, the Conference of Parties, was scheduled in 1994 in Bahamas. Convention on Biological Diversity is often referred to as CBD. It was inspired by the global community's growing commitment to sustainable development. It was a dramatic step towards conservation of biological diversity. The convention had three major objectives. The first was conservation of biological diversity. The second was sustainable use of components of biological diversity. And the third objective was fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising out of the use of genetic resources. This convention is probably the most all-encompassing international agreements ever adopted. If we have to achieve the goals of this convention, many other steps need to be taken. We have to gather all the knowledge that we have about biological diversity and use it effectively. We also need to have a deep understanding of human ecology and effects of humans on the environment. It is needed that we communicate to those who can stimulate and shape policy change. All the countries which are signatory to this need to adopt environmentally friendly practices and technologies. This requires large-scale technical and financial cooperation at national and international level. Article 6 of CBD requires all countries to prepare their own national strategies, plans and programs of conservation of biological diversity. The National Biodiversity Plan need to be integrated with relevant sectoral and cross-sectoral plans. For example, biodiversity conservation is closely linked to the industrial development and to mining. Planning forest and water sector is also required for conserving biodiversity. This should be done by all the relevant ministries together. India ratified the convention after long participatory and consultative process with various stakeholders. A national policy and macro level action strategy on biodiversity was developed and approved by the Committee of Secretaries in 1999. This was submitted to the CBD Secretariat. Ministry of Environment and Forest of the Government of India implemented an externally aided project called National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan between 2000 and 2004. In 2006, National Environmental Policy was approved by the Cabinet. After this, preparation of National Biodiversity Action Plan was taken up. It was ensured that the action plan actually supports the National Environmental Policy. The 10th Conference of Parties happened at Aichi. In this conference, a strategic plan for biodiversity conservation was made for the decade 2011 to 2020. It set 5 goals and 20 Aichi targets. The main 5 goals of the Aichi targets are described here. Strategic goal A is to address the underlying causes of biodiversity loss by mainstreaming biodiversity across government and society. There are 4 targets under this. They have to be achieved by 2020. People are to be made aware of biodiversity values. They are to be integrated into development plans. Subsidies which are harmful to the biodiversity need to be eliminated. Production of all has to be made sustainable, and natural resources are to be protected. Strategic Goal B talks about reducing the direct pressure on biodiversity and promoting sustainable use. 6 targets are set for this goal. They are about how conservation of various species can be taken up. The targets set about reducing pollution and biotic pressure, which are the main causes of extinction of species. Strategic Goal C is to improve the status of biodiversity by safeguarding ecosystems, species, and genetic diversity. The 3 goals set targets for protecting habitat, species, and genetic resources. Strategic Goal D is to enhance the benefits from biodiversity and ecosystem services for all the people. 3 targets in this are about enhancing ecosystem services and building ecological resilience. Strategic Goal E is to enhance implementation through participatory planning, knowledge management, and capacity building of the people. 4 targets are set up which include protecting traditional knowledge, improving science and technology of conservation, and mobilizing finances. This is a highly ambitious plan. It tries to inspire broad-based action in support of biodiversity within a single decade. The strategic plan and Aichi targets are the overarching framework on biodiversity for the entire United Nations. The United Nations General Assembly from 2011 to 2020 was identified as the United Nations Decade on Biodiversity by the United Nations General Assembly. It coincided with the duration of the strategic plan. Many nations have committed to establishing their own national targets using strategic plans and Aichi targets. Many of the Aichi targets are related to the work of different ministries or departments like Commerce, Agriculture, and Health Ministry. Setting of national targets in line with Aichi targets requires substantial cross-sectoral coordination. India has developed 12 national biodiversity targets along with the indicators for monitoring. It has brought out a document that is addition to the earlier National Biodiversity Action Plan. In 2012, India successfully hosted the 11th meeting of the Conference of Parties called COP11 at Hyderabad. This event provided India an opportunity to consolidate, scale up, and showcase national strength on biodiversity. Ministry for Environment and Forest was the host for this, and Minister for Environment and Forest was the president of COP11. Since then, India has taken up number of biodiversity related activities. Some of them are quite unique and innovative. In 2011, a Science Express Biodiversity Special SEBS train was run in different cities of India. This train would go to different cities and stop in the railway station. It was open for all. Children were encouraged to come and visit the train and see the exhibition. This train was the brand ambassador of COP11. It helped to create large-scale awareness on biodiversity issues. It was very popular, and it was again started in 2013 and again in 2014. After the Hyderabad COP11, a biodiversity garden was set up in Hyderabad. A national biodiversity museum has also been proposed. One of the most important developments in international forum is the Nagoya Protocol. This was adopted in 2010 after 6 years of negotiation. This protocol is very important for India because this addresses the access and benefit sharing about biological resources. It is part of Convention on Biological Diversity. Nagoya Protocol applies to genetic resources and to the benefits arising from their utilization. India has thousands of varieties of cereals and pulses. A single rice crop in India can have many varieties. Each variety has been created by indigenous communities after much thinking. They have been protecting it for many years. Many other varieties of vegetables, fruits, and other animals have also been developed in India. They are the biological resources of India, and large-scale economy is attached to them. There are also many types of wild medicinal plants. Some of them are medicinally important. The species and the traditional knowledge about the species both need to be protected. Nagoya Protocol covers traditional knowledge associated with the genetic resources. It lays down guidelines for sharing the benefits of use of different species. Many species have been taken from India and used abroad for commercial purposes. In the past, there was very little that we can do for getting the benefits out of these. But today, because of the Nagoya Protocol and because of the various laws which have come in India, we have a great control over our country's biological resources. Nagoya Protocol was meant to create greater legal backing and transparency for both providers and users of genetic resources. It helped to establish more predictable conditions for access to genetic resources. This protocol specifically helps in ensuring benefit sharing when the genetic resources leave the country. By ensuring benefit sharing, Nagoya Protocol creates incentive to conserve and sustainably use genetic resources. It enhances the contribution of biodiversity towards development and human well-being. India has made many positive contributions in the Nagoya Protocol. The objective was fair and equitable sharing of benefits. India has signed the protocol on May 2011. Along with the Convention on Biological Diversity, another plan was launched at the Rio Earth Summit. It is known as Agenda 21. Agenda 21 is a comprehensive plan of action to be taken up globally, nationally, and locally. It is mainly an action plan for the United Nations. Other multilateral organizations, individual governments around the world are also signatories to this. It can be executed at local, national, and global levels. The 21 in Agenda 21 refers to the 21st century. It is a 350-page document divided into 40 chapters grouped into 4 sections. Section 1 is on social and economic dimensions. It is directed towards combating poverty, especially in the developing countries. It talks about changing the patterns of consumption, promoting health, and achieving more sustainable population and settlement in decision making. Section 2 is about conservation and management of resources for development. It includes atmospheric protection, combating deforestation, protecting fragile environments, and conservation of biological diversity. It also talks about management of biotechnology and radioactive waste. Section 3 discusses strengthening the role of major groups. It talks about involving children, youth, women, non-governmental organizations, and local authorities in the conservation process. Business and industry, the laborers, are also involved. It specifically talks about strengthening the role of indigenous people, their communities, in the conservation. Section 4 talks about means of implementation, includes science and technology transfer between developed and developing countries. Agenda 21 talks of key role that must be played by strategies, plans and policies at national level. United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development is responsible for monitoring the implementation of the UNCED decisions. The first meeting in 1993 was an organizational meeting. The next meetings reviewed Agenda 21. Agenda 21 is especially important for the indigenous peoples organizations. Principle 22 of the Agenda 21 states that indigenous people and their communities and other local communities have a vital role in environmental management. This is because of their knowledge and traditional practices. States should recognize and duly support their identity, culture and interest and enable their efficient participation in the sustainable development. Chapter 28 of Agenda 21 calls for each community to create its own local Agenda 21. Each local authority should enter into dialogue with citizens, local organizations and private enterprises to create local Agenda 21. Agenda 21 consists of 15 different programs designed for transition to sustainable development. The objective was to bring a change in the present system of nations. Agenda 21 has separate programs of action on all aspects of human life: agriculture, biodiversity and ecosystem management, education, energy and housing, population, and all others are also covered. In 2012, the member countries reaffirmed their commitment to Agenda 21. The report of this meeting was titled "The Future We Want." 180 world leaders had participated in this conference. Implementation of Agenda 21 continues to remain voluntary. In some cases, Agenda 21 has been criticized. Some people feel that it is an attempt of the United Nations to impose its centralized agenda on the nations. In spite of this criticism, it still remains a guiding document for many conservation efforts. In this module, we looked at various conventions on biological diversity. We also looked at Aichi targets, Nagoya Protocol and Agenda 21. All of these are extremely important global consensus on how we want to deal with our biodiversity and ecosystems. If you are interested in learning about this, you can take a look at our essential reading section. It gives many websites which give the information in detail. You can also take a look at e-text for more information. I hope you have enjoyed this lecture. Thank you.